So today I have a special guest. He's sitting in Australia right now. I'm sitting here in Massachusetts. His name is Dr. Christian Heim. Christian is a clinical psychiatrist. He's also an author, a speaker. He's the host of a YouTube show called Late Night Lies. And the name of the book that he wrote is called 7 Types of Love and Navigating Love in a Fractured World, if I have that correctly. Christian, welcome. Thank you.
Dave, thank you very much. It's just a pleasure to be here. As the sun is rising in Massachusetts, it's a long way away here in Australia.
Yeah, I bet. You're the first person that I'm podcasting with from another country. So I'm excited about it. It's going to be great.
Oh, so fantastic. Oh, that's good.
So the thing is we're not talking about a light topic today. We're going to talk about things like suicide, depression, and addiction today, which is, none of those are pretty topics and none of those are easy to discuss. They're kind of taboo in so many, no matter where you're from or what your experiences are, these are difficult to discuss. What do you want people to know today so that we can navigate this conversation in a productive manner?
Dave, the thing that I really want people to know is that there is hope. I have been involved, as we've discussed, you have, in quite a number of suicides, and they're always very upsetting, but it doesn't have to be that way. And yes, we are in a society that, I got to say, is getting a few things wrong. We've just got to tweak a few things and we could have it great, okay? But what I want to let people know, particularly the people who listen to you, people who have influence at work, that there are things that they can do to make sure that this problem is minimized and that the workplace can actually be more content than it is for people at the moment.
Right. So you when we spoke last week, you talked about how to navigate these conversations specific to work. How do we talk about suicide, depression, addiction? There are a lot of over the years, these are areas that many HR people would have said, just stay away from that. Don't get too involved with people. And today it's much, much different, where we're almost forced to get into that. And especially over the last year, I would think, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, that's the whole thing. We're in a position that we don't want to be in. We have to deal with these things because we know too many people that it's affecting, be it depression, addiction, or suicide. So it is counterproductive to keep our mouths closed at this stage. But people are afraid to actually say things because nobody wants to get it wrong. Emotion feelings run high, and nobody wants that feeling that they said the wrong thing and, oh my gosh, could actually push somebody towards any of those three, then take them away. And that's why, Dave, I want to say the bottom line is if you can make the place of work basically a more content place to be. And what I mean by that is more real, more human, more flesh with flesh, sort of we're just people here together, then you're already doing the best thing you could possibly do to help prevent suicide, depression, and addictions.
Right. And it's not that it would be, it's not necessarily. So I think what's happening though is, companies all over the globe, they're bringing people in. They're bringing in an entire human being that they don't necessarily have the history of that person or what's going on in the mind of that person. You're a clinical psychiatrist.
Yes.
So you have the background and the training to enter into these conversations, but to do so delicately. When you think about all the people responsible for hiring around the globe, managing people, even though they may be smart, they don't necessarily have the tools, maybe even the emotional intelligence to do this. And even when they are smart, this is a tough topic. The one thing I will say before I'm just kind of making a statement, not even asking you a question here, but when I watched one of your Late Night Lies shows with Caroline, what I found interesting was you're able to, I don't want to call it a light way, but in an approachable way, address something that's really, really dark. And I would think that has a lot to do with your training, your experience, your background. How many people are actually equipped to deal with something this heavy?
Okay, well, in one sense, Dave, actually none of us are equipped, okay, because it affects all of us. We are all human beings, and when another human being takes their own life, that is just deeply upsetting. There's just no other way to say that. That's going to have all of us asking questions of ourselves, all right? And it's going to put us on edge. But right up front, I want to say that people in the workplace actually should not be called upon to have the skills to manage somebody's mental health. I find it really difficult, and I spent 12 years learning how to do that. So the bottom line for business is actually, you know what, we're here to make money. We're here to offer a product, a service. We're here in the business game. But part of that is also, you know, we're doing it together with 5 other people, 10, 20, 50, 500, however big the company is. There becomes another aspect to it. Like it or not, you become a bit of a family, right? Because you're seeing the same people every day. And this is where it does help to have a few skills to sort of say, well, I don't want my workplace to become a toxic environment where people say, I hate going there every day. I want mine to be a place where people can enjoy themselves. Hey, they got to get the work done. They got to feel good about the work, but I want them to feel good about themselves too, because you know it, Dave, when you come home from a day's work and you've done a great job, that just feels good.
Absolutely.
That is not the sort of feeling that makes you say, I want to check out of this world, okay?
Now, here comes the sun, by the way. I told you before we started, I didn't put my curtain up, so the sun's coming right in my face. When it comes to this topic, I always wonder, you know, suicide, depression, anxiety, you know, I mean, there's different levels of issues that people have. How many of us are just born predisposed with those tendencies versus how much of that is conditioned in your experience?
Okay, well, this is a very important question, Dave, because psychiatry is moving its paradigm, okay? Psychiatry, as you know, is a medical specialty. So I studied next to people who are now specializing in the heart, the kidney, the liver, all of those sort of things. And we used to think of psychiatry as being one of those disciplines, that it was somehow attached to the brain, which is fine, it is, and I work a lot with the brain, but it's also attached to this thing called a mind. And we actually do not have a definition of the mind that all scientists agree on, because we can't touch it, we can't see it, we actually don't know what it is. We do know one thing, we've all got one, all right? So we do know that it exists, okay? It's not that intangible. But because of that, right, we used to look for questions and answers about psychiatry in the body, in the brain, brain chemicals, and the number of times people were told, oh, you've just got a chemical imbalance, right? Whereas now, particularly these last couple of decades, where we have seen huge rate rises, for example, in the USA, in the last 20 years, the suicide rate has gone up 33%, which is just astronomical. It's that cannot be accounted for by your brain or your genetics, because our genetic makeup hasn't changed appreciably for about 60,000 years now. Mm-hmm. So that tells us, no, the cause of this is somewhere in the environment. It is how we are living. And unfortunately, that I agree that that's the case, that's where we've got to look for answers. And but there's also hope in that, because that means there are things that we can actually do to change this situation.
You know, I'm glad to hear you say that. As morbid as it is, here comes this. I can't get out of the sun here. But as morbid as morbid as it is, I like to believe that we actually have a say in it, and yes, that we can do something about it. What kind of conditions would you say, and I don't know if there's enough detail yet or evidence yet, but what kind of things would you say are the most prominent contributors to this type of situation, no matter which, you know, suicide, depression, what are the most common?
Okay, so that's wonderful. What I'm going to go to is the way to change the situation for addictions, for depression, for suicide, is to move away from the risk factors, so the things that put people in a high risk category, and move towards protective factors, those things that stop us from getting any of these sort of things, okay? And we actually know a lot about the risk factors of suicide. For example, it was over 120 years ago that somebody came in, this is Durkheim, he came across the idea that, the more socially isolated you are, the more at risk you are for suicide. And that has actually borne out. So we now have, okay, so I'm going to go to one of the models, one of the theories. It's called the interpersonal theory of suicide. And it was put together by a clinical psychologist by the name of Thomas Joyner. He looked at two things. He looked at what makes people want to check out and what makes it easier for them to do that. Okay, you're getting lost in that blinding light there, Dave. Either that or you're just having an angelic experience that's blowing my mind.
I think it's the latter. Yeah.
Good on you. Okay, so he looked at why would people want to check out of this life? And he found two things, and this is highly relevant. If people feel useless, right? If they feel that they're a burden on other people, all right, that's a horrible feeling. And all of us that have work, that are employed, we take for granted that wonderful feeling of, you know what, I was worthwhile today, I contributed today. That is the most wonderful feeling that a human being can have in relationship to society. Society kind of wants me on board. That's great. And the second thing that he found or articulated was the idea of belonging. As long as we belong to a family, to a group, a tribe, or to a certain firm that's doing something that I believe in, all right, I'm not going to want to check out because I got people around me to talk to. I got people who understand me. Right. So these two things, feeling that you're useful and feeling that you belong somewhere, more and more is tied up with our workplace. And I know I'm kind of hammering that home, but in that is the hope, all right? We actually don't have to crack the whip to make sure that people are working. These days, we've got to stop people from working too hard, okay? Sort of take a little bit of time off.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you say that. I think I might have referenced to you when we spoke last week, some of the longest, like the people that live the longest and happiest have really strong social networks. Those that, and I wonder like how much our social networks actually improve not only our mental health, but our physical health. And the other thing I find interesting is when I think of the depression, it's like it's a given. Or anxiety, it seems to be a given these days. ADHD seems to be a given. I don't know anyone I've run into very few people that aren't saying, no, I got that. And it's a permanent condition. This is what I have and this is who I am and that's it. How much are you working against that? How often are you working against that? Where are we in a world where we want people to be that way, or we want to convince people that you are depressed, you are anxious, you have this, so that they keep it so we can make money off of it?
Okay, that's one way to look at it. And there is some of that in there, okay? Because yes, the medical industry is an industry based on commercialism and money as much as anything else is, okay? And that can be to the detriment as well. However, there's actually something good that's happening in our society that's kind of working against us, all right? Because we now live in a society where we don't want anybody to miss out. We want everybody to feel part of it. We're trying to be more and more inclusive as we go on. And you know what? On face value, that's fine. But because we don't want people who are depressed to miss out, or people who are divorced or addicted or anxious to miss out, we kind of say that, you know what, it's no big deal being depressed. There are so many people depressed. It's kind of okay, all right? And the downside of that is that we start to expect depression to be part of life, as though it's a normal part of life. Whereas depression is one of my enemies, Dave. Nobody walks into my office saying, I'm depressed. Can we just explore this and see how interesting it is, right? People turn up and say, I know what this is. I hate it. I want it gone. So it is still an enemy. And so there is still something in this way of looking at the world, that there are good things that happen to us and there are bad things that happen to us. And we have to work to maximize the one and minimize the other. I think we need to hold on to all of that.
You started off by saying that there's hope here. And I would think that hope part of that hope is recognizing that you can actually do something about it. And, you know,
Yeah.
I see people, I've met people my whole life who prioritize, say, physical health, physical fitness. You know, they want to lose weight so they can fit into clothes, or they want to be stronger, they want to run a marathon, and they have like a diet and exercise program to improve the quality of their physical health, which
Yes.
I also believe, you know, stimulates mental health at the same time.
Yes, it
But
does.
should we be looking at our mental health in the same way? Should we be on some sort of regiment, like consciously, to improve the quality and strength of our mental health?
Well, that approach is a two-edged sword when it comes to mental health. By the way, I need to let people know that we have dozens of studies that show that exercise is protective against depression in particular, all right? And we're finding out some amazing things about depression. Like we're finding out that the mechanism of how depression works in the body and the brain is actually the same way that heart disease works, okay? Which is a bit bizarre, except that, you know, we've always thought that mood, although we know it's in the brain, we use the metaphor of the heart, okay? And so although that's an ancient debunked idea, there's still something to it. And the more that we research the human body, the more we find these complex connections. Okay, so now we found a connection between our guts and our brains. Okay, we've got this one nerve that connects the heart, the gut, and the brain. Okay, so when we say that depression is something gut-wrenching or heartbreaking, these things aren't just in our language from coincidence. You know, there is something that happens. So in other words, the body's a whole, all right? We can't pick it all apart. And the thing is that if we go on a regimen to protect our mental health, in today's society, what we do is we tend to do that alone. And we say, what's the best thing for me? I will put it in a regimen for me. I will look at the right exercise program for me. And every time I say me, the opportunity for we cuts out just a little bit, right? And because our society has been so prosperous and we've been able to fulfill so many of our needs, right? It becomes very me focused, okay? Which means that the time that we spend with other people is diminishing, and that actually is not good for our brains.
Yeah, well, that's even what I was thinking about with the regimen. It's not just, hey, I'm going to do this today. I think about the regimen as socialization as well, time spent with the right people, with people that bring you up versus people that bring you down, and say doing so consciously. You keep talking about that need for socialization. How much is technology working against us at times?
All right. The studies are not very encouraging. So in other words, technology is working against us terribly. So we have amazing technologies. Look what we're doing right now, Dave. This would have been impossible 10 years ago, okay? Yep. It's just amazing. However, a study out of China where they took college-age students that were really heavy users of screen technology, iPhone, internet, computers, over 10 hours a day. Within a year, they saw that an area of their brain was shrinking, okay? Now, this area of the brain is called the anterior cingulate gyrus, and it sits in our limbic system. And one of the most important things that it does is it takes care of our empathy, so the way we feel with other people, okay? Now, if this area is shrinking, that means that the brain has said, you know what, I don't need this, because these people do not interact with other people as much. And unfortunately, it's a cliche. We know the more that we're connected to the internet, the more we're disconnected from our neighbors, our friends, and even people in our own households, okay?
How do we, I'm sorry, I cut you off, go ahead.
Okay, and I just wanted to say that the brain needs exercise. So every time you touch a person, or you watch their expressions, or you try to work out what they really mean by what they just said, or you listen to the tone of their voice, or you're looking at what their body's doing, okay, the anterior cingulate gyrus is exercising and going, oh, what does that person mean? What's that person feeling? How do I work this person out? And so that's what keeps the anterior cingulate gyrus in our empathy centers intact.
It does. What if we spend too much time, and at the risk of sounding like an old man, and that's the risk I have as a parent, is anytime I say, put your phones away, or these things are killing us, I sound like a caveman
That's right.
to be, where it's like the statement is dismissed immediately as if I don't know any better. And I don't understand today's world, when I think the reverse is true. The question, though, is, even though we need that as people, you need that interaction, or else that part of your brain starts to shut off or get smaller.
That's right.
The further we get from that, though, then you put somebody in that situation. Do they have the skills and tools, or have they eroded to the point where they don't know how to handle that face-to-face interaction? They need to be behind that screen.
Well, the thing is that it's a perpetuating cycle, because and I'll go to brain chemicals here. What all these technologies do for us is give us dopamine hits. Mm-hmm. And that's our reward center. You get a dopamine hit when you take certain drugs, when you have alcohol, when you enjoy watching a movie, okay, when you're with somebody you love. These are all things that are pleasurable. When you eat food, it's all dopamine hits. And the thing is that, and the market researchers know this, sort of when you hear that ding on your phone, your brain actually goes, oh, there's a message for me. Somebody wants me. I wonder who that could be. And it feels great, okay? The trouble is that it's mainly dopamine hits. However, people take effort first, all right? Because you can argue with people, you've got to figure them out first. It feels a little bit uncomfortable. You've got to get over that initial hump. But then if you have a good conversation with somebody, the dopamine starts flowing, all right? And then not only that, you don't just get dopamine pleasure, but you get oxytocin trust, okay? And this happens in business all the time. When you clinch a deal, you feel good. You feel that you and this person have made a connection, all right? Or you end up with serotonin, and serotonin gives us this feeling of calm contentment. So it's when you've closed the door after a hard day's work, you kick your shoes off, and you just lie back on the couch with your favorite drink or something, okay? You feel at home, all right? You feel like there's no pressure, it's gone. And the other thing is beta endorphins. And beta endorphins, a lot of people know, comes from the runner's high when you do a lot of exercise, but it also comes from when humans laugh together, or cry together, or just hug each other, or just feel that they belong.
When this the dark side of this topic, the whole suicide piece of it, for years and years and years, I kind of think, I'm separate from that. I don't have that experience. And then when we talked last week, I thought to myself, oh my God, I've been exposed to this roughly 10 times in my life. And 3 times I was there when somebody received a call that a loved one had committed suicide. It's the most horrifying experience. The first time I was there, the screams that I've never heard anyone scream like this in my life. And it was just so devastating, and there were no words to even comfort the person. And earlier that day, this woman asked me if I could go check on her boyfriend. And she asked me if I would go to his house. They had gotten in a fight and she hadn't heard from him in a few days. And I said I would. And I didn't think anything of it until that call came in before I went. And that was the call that he was found. But I've been in that situation a number of times. And then just, I've seen that, especially and the thing I'll say is, in almost every situation, the person who committed suicide had some sort of chemical dependency or lingering depression. And I guess my question is, how do you know, like, what can other people do to kind of spot that we got a problem here? Like, it's not just a drinking issue. It's not just having a recreational drug, whatever. There's a problem here. How do you know that?
Okay. The bottom line, Dave, is that we don't, okay? And like before you said, there's just aren't words to describe some of the feelings, okay? And I'll share one suicide story that I was involved in, and it wasn't somebody that I was working with, okay? It was a fellow doctor, and I used to be part of a group of doctors that had a little orchestra. We used to play different instruments together, and this guy was part of it. And if you spoke to this person, if you saw his background, he was married, had X number of children, okay, enjoyed his music, was doing well at work. Dave, to this day, we don't know. His wife doesn't know why he took his life. Wow. You know, sort of, I'm a psychiatrist. There was another psychiatrist there, and we didn't pick anything up. And this is what really scares people about suicide. It's just so unpredictable. In fact, the studies show that psychiatrists are not that great at predicting who's going to commit suicide or not, okay? And I know that doesn't sound like there's much hope, but the hope actually comes like 10 steps before that, all right? It comes at the point where you just notice that somebody's changed. Hey, I just noticed you're not your happy self these last couple of weeks. Are you okay? All right. Or just, how are you traveling? You know, I'm just a bit concerned, you know, seen a few changes. And just asking that question is, can be life-saving, all right?
Right.
And in Australia, there's this whole campaign. It's called Are You Okay? And you can actually just put those 4 letters into the internet and all this information will come up. And the theory behind all of that actually comes from what I was talking about, the interpersonal theory of suicide, to make sure that people feel useful and that they feel that they belong. And they've crystallized the efforts of people to try to help people just into these 4 words. Are you okay? Mm-hmm. How are you going? Are you traveling? And it really comes down to just being another human being that's got a little bit of time to listen. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to fix anything, all right? You just have to be another human being. And if we could do that more in our society, then we'd have less people like your friend's boyfriend or my colleague.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I think I mentioned, you know, growing up when we spoke last week, growing up, yeah. You know, it was not, we didn't grow up in a bad home, but there was definitely volatility in the house. And as a little kid, you know, my mother, unfortunately, used to always threaten to kill herself. It was kind of a recurring thing that would just happen. And she would always say, this is, you know, I'm going to take these pills. I'm not going to wake up in the morning. And as a little kid, it just scared the crap out of me. I would just cry and beg her not to do these things. And then my siblings would do the same thing. And then over the years, this is a horrible thing to say, but over the years, I was just done listening to it. And it was just, you know, she never did it. Yeah. But it got to the point where the threats became, you know, almost daring her, like as we get older, we'll just do it. You know, we became almost apathetic to it and almost unsympathetic to it. And it was like, it became like a defense mechanism. Like, don't threaten that. Don't threaten that, you know, don't do this. Don't do this. If you know, it was almost weaponized. Have you heard about this in the past? Is this a common thing, or is this like an uncommon thing?
Unfortunately, Dave, it is common. Unfortunately, you know, and as you know, no child should be put through that, all right? Because children, as they're growing up, have actually no idea of what normal is. They're still learning what normal is, okay? So if this is the sort of stuff that mum says, well, that just becomes normal life.
Right.
And you know, people look at, let's say we've uncovered a lot of childhood sexual abuse, a lot of childhood physical abuse, a lot of neglect, and we say, what's happening? A lot of that, and we don't know how much for sure, but a lot of that is that we're intervening. We're actually not turning a blind eye, all right? If there's something horrible going on in a family, all right, there'll be a social worker, a psychiatrist, and maybe the police there to help sort it out, because this is not normal, right?
Right.
So it comes down to no human being should experience depression, right?
Right.
Ideally.
You use the word belonging a few times in our conversation
Yeah.
today. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't have an ounce of a medical degree under my belt. When we talked last week, a lot of the work I do, it kind of mirrors what you do, minus the fact that I'm not a doctor and I can't prescribe any medicine. But
yeah,
I have a pretty good understanding of how people think and what people deal with. And the belonging piece always echoes in my mind when I'm talking to anybody is, do you really feel like you belong? I don't necessarily ask that question just for the hell of it,
yeah.
but I try to help people say what they're not saying, and
Yes.
and make them aware of things that they might not be saying. And you know, I coach and train management professionals, I coach and train sales professionals, but business professionals of all kinds. And most of what gets in the way of their success, fulfillment, happiness is they don't really say what they want to say. They try to say things, or they avoid saying things that are uncomfortable, or they come at it and they pound somebody with something that they don't even mean in order, and hope that it forces it into somebody else's brain. But what they're not doing is understanding. And then as a result of that, they don't feel understood. And I just think at the end of the day, that's, to me, that's what's underneath it all, is feeling alone in a crowded world, feeling
Yes.
like you don't belong. Like if you did something wrong, for example,
Yeah.
I would think it's just easier to say it and just take your lumps, like whether it's being ridiculed, embarrassed, shamed, beat up, whatever. That to me is less of a punishment than holding it inside. I just feel like we've got to learn to talk and just be okay with the consequences.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I'm going to take you back to the people that you work with, the people in sales, the leadership people, because they're part of a game. And this is James Cast, the idea of an infinite game and a finite game. Yeah, that if you sell me a car, all right, either you're going to get a good deal, all right, or I'm going to get a good deal, but there's kind of a win-lose thing in there. Okay. However, if we become friends, all right, either we continue that friendship where we both win, or we don't see each other and we both lose. And the trouble is that when we're at work, we're so focused on the finite game of doing business that we forget that right in front of me is a human being, right? Who is also part of the infinite game of, hey, I just want to get on as a human being, okay? And we used to have a society where all of those belonging issues were actually sorted out at home, okay, with the mates down at the bar or whatever, okay? Whereas more and more, the workplace is the only sense of belonging for a lot of people. So if you come to work and you feel that you don't belong there because people are focused on the game of business, whatever the business game happens to be, you start to take that personally, even though here's the thing, it's not meant personally. So what you said about getting us talking is actually very real, very relevant, and very important.
Why is it so hard though? That's what I mean, I have my theories, but in your mind, why is it so hard for people to just put stuff on the table?
Okay, so individually, you've got a whole lot of issues, including pride issues, privacy issues, and things like that. But in the workplace, the one real barrier is actually that time is money. And so if you're spending time just talking with people on a friendship type level, that's time that you're not spending on the business game. And so the business is not doing as well. But I got to say, there's a way around that, okay? Because I'm really enthusiastic about places that get what they call cultural ambassadors. These are people who are paid to make sure that the workplace is a happy place. And these are people who get to know people personally, to see what interests everybody has, then organizes time out, Friday night drinks or camps once a year, or what's very important, becomes a 1 hourly team meeting where people get to know each other a whole lot more. They get to actually share some of their life stories rather than be motivated just for the business gain. And what this does is it creates an environment where people are happy to go to work. And they go, hey, I am somebody at work. People know me. I belong there. And of course, as you know, the studies show that the more content people are at work, the higher their productivity is going to be. So
can we go overboard on that, Christian? Yeah, I've seen many organizations over the last, say, 15 years go out of their way to create environments that are, I don't want to call them playgrounds, but for all intents and purposes, playgrounds where they have the beer carts and the cigar hours and all. I mean, you name it, they've got it. And it attracts, like, these environments have done an awesome job attracting young people into them. But where the rubber meets the road is when, by the way, we still need you to perform here. It's not
that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But they turn over. I've seen so many of these organizations turn over young people who fall in love really quickly. Like, I work at the best company. I work for the best boss. And then 2 months later, 3 months later, I got fired. That place sucks. I'm going to go on Glassdoor and then rip them apart. There's that balance between, we're going to provide a lot of fun in exchange for you bringing some responsibility and accountability to the table. Like, I feel like that line is blurred a lot. Any thoughts there?
Yes. And I think sometimes we're afraid of giving the bad news as well. Okay. We like the fun. All right. But you grew up in a family. I grew up in a family. It's not always fun. All right. But here's the thing, even when I was 8 years old and I was doing the drying up and my sister was doing the washing up and we were arguing, all right, we were still in relationship. And sometimes we need to see that even though it can be an argument, it's still part of being in relationship. As long as you can get back into relationship at the end of that it's not all fun, because at work, as you know, things just aren't always fun. Sometimes it's sort of heads down, backsides up, let's get this all done. And if you feel that you're part of a family doing that together, that can still feel like I belong. Okay. Yeah, we've got a couple of hard weeks ahead, but we're going to get through this together. All right. Whereas if it's just the fun, okay, sure, have the drinks on the Friday night, but you've got to be working hard during the week to get there. Okay.
Right.
So it is, as you said, a balance.
Yeah. And how much of it is on us, or how do you get this into somebody's head? You tell me if I'm going down the wrong path here, but how helpful would it be if we all just kind of viewed ourselves as a work in progress who, I've got to assume that if I came to Australia and I worked with you, eventually there would be a time where I might irritate you, or I might have a value that is not aligned with your value, and it makes you critical of me in that moment. Now I could respond and be angry at you for being angry at me and, screw you and all this stuff. But how important is it for me to say, hey, you know what? Maybe he's got a reason for feeling that way. Maybe I could be coming across differently. Like, how important is it for us to improve our self-awareness and maybe recognize that we are works in progress. We'll never be complete. It's okay that things aren't perfect all the time.
Oh, in fact, we've got to expect things not to be perfect. In fact, there are a few things that we don't talk about. We're starting to talk a lot about personality in society, and that's actually very healthy because personality is one of those places where we're just going to clash. All right, you put an extrovert next to an introvert, okay, they're just not going to work that well together. You mentioned values, that you're going to have some values that clash with my values. All right, that's really good because that's another one of those areas where we can clash, and it just takes that awareness that, you know what, this is just a values clash. This is just what Dave wants, and this is what Christian wants, and we're on separate paths. And the third area is culture. Okay, so you're from a New England culture, whatever that happens to be. I'm from a migrant, grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney culture, whatever that happens to be, right? And so that's going to shape who we are as well. And that can come into conflict because we just happen to do things differently. And that's one of the areas that society is looking at it as a taboo subject, because we're afraid of racism. We're afraid of somebody saying, oh, my way is better than your way. But if we look at culture, really, we just do things differently. And if we learned about that, we'd actually be able to tolerate and even accept each other a whole lot more.
What would you say is a bigger issue? Our inability to understand ourselves, or our inability to understand other people?
I think our ability to understand ourselves or other people is always going to be limited, because you know that you personally are like this unfathomable universe, right? And you don't even get to the bottom of your own motives. You could spend a lifetime in your head and you'll just never get to understand it all. Other people, oh my gosh, there are just so many more barriers. How the hell are we going to understand them? Okay. But if we could just see that, you know what, we all have a universe in our head that can get scary sometimes, that we don't understand sometimes, but sometimes we do. And if we were able to talk about that, that would become a shared experience. And anything that leads to the Me Too experience, you know, or, oh my gosh, he's just like me. Right. That would then start uniting us. Doesn't matter what our backgrounds would be.
At what point is my need to focus on what's going on in my head, even if it's from a problems perspective?
Yeah.
At what point is it selfish of me to think that, you know, where I am a complete drain on you because I can't get out of my own head. I've prioritized my own thoughts and validated my own thoughts to the point where that's all I consider, you know, and everything, you need to cater to me because I'm here. At what point do I need to know, if at all, that that's selfish?
I think in society, we're kind of at that point, okay, because we've now got these culture wars where there are people sort of trying to shout louder to make sure that their point gets heard, right? Whereas there's got to be room for all of us in the end analysis somehow. And again, this is a side effect of our prosperity, because we're able to fulfill our own wants and needs and dreams and hopes and desires, that we think a whole lot more about ourselves, and we're losing that sense of community. And there are a lot of people actually finding now, you know what, I don't want to lose that community. I would actually like us all to have a sense of community as well, you know, but how do you get, because the only way to get a sense of community is to get everybody else thinking that way, you know?
Right.
And so there are very few places, you know, churches are one place, workplace is another place, and getting together for sporting groups is another. But, you know, our sense of community is getting more and more sparse, and that's part of that belonging thing, Dave, you know?
Yeah, I would think that in your world, and I was wondering this when we connected last week, how do you maintain your own energy and your own hope, knowing that you're always in these conversations trying to make hope available to other people?
Yes.
It's got to be I mean, at some point, you've got to be saying, here we are again. Here we are again. It's a new person, similar circumstances, new person, similar circumstances. Does it ever get discouraging?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it certainly does. And this underlies the need for psychiatrists to be professionals. And what I mean by that, psychiatrists need to be paid for what they do, just like you need to be paid for what you do. And that ensures that it becomes all about the other person, right? That payment says, you're here for me, I'm not here for you. And that's the way it should be. But then I have to find my sense of belonging, which I do when I come home to my partner, my family, or even when I walk up and down my beach, you know, or the beach that I share with, you know, sort of thousands of other people. But I get my sense of belonging and get my energy from elsewhere. So that as a psychiatrist, one thing that's really heartbreaking for me is that I'm often the last person that somebody has, because they don't have that sense of belonging. And so they're swimming in this big sea by themselves.
Right.
You know?
Right. Is the answer really just one conversation at a time for all of us? Can we just maximize what's in front of us right now with the person that's in front of us? Or is it more of a is the solve on this? If I don't know the solution, there probably isn't a solution, but is it really more of a blanketed way of addressing it? How do we? Everybody comes from such a different perspective with so many different experiences. You could grow up in the next house over from me, and it could have been chaos.
Yeah.
And I could have grown up in a perfect home in the same neighborhood. And on paper, well, they grew up in the same community. They're fine. They have no problems. When you had problems and I didn't, for example, like how do you, I mean, we all have to really be conditioned to relate to just what's in front of us in that moment, right? I mean, you can't blanket communities of people, races, genders, whatever. You can't. I mean, I would think that it's not possible, even though it feels to me at times that's what we're doing.
Well, it seems to be that's what we're trying to do. Look, as a psychiatrist, I've got the luxury of working with one person at a time, okay? And so we explore that person and that person's situation and possibilities, and we look for specific solutions for one person, okay? Yep. When you're talking about what should we as a society do, well, as a psychiatrist, there are about 3 things that I believe that we need to do. One, find an answer to the screen technology problem, because we love our screens. They are fantastic to us, but they are driving us all apart from each other. And that's going to be one of the challenges. The second one we're starting to address, and that's the issue of abuses, particularly to children, okay? We've only really addressed that over the last 20 years, and we've still got a long way to go on that. But if we could have all that out of society, the amount of mental health issues would be less and less. And the third thing has to do with all of our addictions, Dave, okay? Because again, it just predisposes to mental health issues, and it's a circle. People who have problems with mental health will look to an addiction because it makes them feel good for a short period of time. And it's a hard thing to get on top of, okay? But they're the 3 things that I see in society that we've got to work on globally. And the most difficult is actually the screen technology, because, gosh, they do us a whole lot of good. That's the problem, you know?
They do. I think with any addiction, though, it's an unconscious thing, right? I mean, you know, if you have a drink every, you have one drink, it's no big deal. If you have one drink every night, it might not even be, but 2 to 3, and all of a sudden this thing happens. You know, right. Eating a piece of cake is no big deal unless you eat a piece of cake 3 times a day. You know, so same with the screen. I would think the same thing. And with the screen, our whole lives are on the screen. Emails and contacts and everything's on the screen. We pay bills on the screen. And so our whole life has been like, our focus goes here and not out here. And until something exists to replace this, we have to consciously say, I'm putting this thing down. And yes. I will say over the last year, more so than any other time in the last 10, I put the thing down. I don't even want to look at it at times. I'm so like, this thing is, I feel like I'm carrying a weight around with me, and I just leave it in the other room. I don't even want to look at it.
Yeah. So I give out 2 suggestions that are quite doable, okay? Firstly, for young people, because we seem to think that they're doomed to be addicted to screens. But if anybody has a party, then have a party and you just have a big box in the front room where all the mobile phones stay, and nobody's allowed to touch them because they're all together with their friends anyway, right? Okay, so you'll have a better time at the party. You'll actually talk and interact more. And the second thing is, I encourage people to find one day a week when they disconnect, okay? Go for a hike, go for a surf, go for a sail, go for a walk, a jog, whatever, but have one day for your head to clear, because you'll find that it takes half the day just to get some of that stuff out of there, and you'll only start enjoying yourself by mid-afternoon. And then you'll enjoy the rest of the day, and then you'll realize just how much the screen actually takes away from you, you know? Absolutely. And both those things are hard to do. They're hard to do, Dave, you know?
Absolutely. I'll give you the last word. You've given some good advice on excellent advice on the technology, the addiction, things like that, like be conscious of that stuff. Is there anything in addition to what we talked about that you want people to know, or is there anything that I can do to help direct people to you? Like under what circumstances should somebody be calling you, and for what reasons?
Okay, so people need to be calling professional help when they're feeling unsafe, when they're feeling out of control, okay? And often other people won't know that, right? But if we're to belong to each other a whole lot more, we got to start having conversations, all right? And that means a simple question like, how are you traveling? And then the time behind it to sort of sit there and listen just for a couple of moments. And after asking something like that, sort of just a follow-up phone call a few days later, all right, to show that you're an actual human being. You're not just doing some process that you heard on a podcast, okay? Because we're all sensitive to that. We all know that too.
Right.
It's got to be genuine, okay? Because we're all human beings. None of us are human doings, okay? So sometimes we just got to be together, you know?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's why I brought up the self-awareness earlier. Like if you can just get to a place where you're good enough with yourself, it's easier to pay attention to other people. If you're not good with yourself and you live in a state of paranoia or neediness, how genuine can you be with anybody else? I mean, you may only seek out those that feel the same way. And are you really there to help them? Or are you there to enable an existing situation? So I just think the answer is always going to come back to self-care across the board: how you eat, how you sleep, how you think, who you hang out with. And that's the consciousness. I think that's where we have to consciously make different choices. I've loved this conversation. I know that we could probably talk for days about it. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to say to anybody that's listening?
Look, Dave, the last thing that I want to say to anybody who's listening is a lot of people who have attempted suicide and have failed, all right, and they've had this epiphany. And a lot of them end up saying, you know what, my life is actually worthwhile. I just didn't see it. Now that I've been given a second chance, I actually treasure it. Now, the trick is to get to that epiphany without having to go through the first time, okay? So the idea is to try to live life as though you're living it the second time, but you want to get it right this time. You want to see how precious life actually is all around you.
Christian Heim, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Just one more thing. Just one more thing, Dave, okay? In our society where we're all battling those big waves, particularly at business, all right? We feel like we're swimming these waves alone. Every person that you are in relationship is like a rope keeping you safe in those seas. So if you stop talking to your father, you've cut one rope. If there's a friend that you haven't kept in contact with, you're cutting another rope, all right? There are only so many ropes you can cut before you're going to be in that sea alone, all right? So I want to encourage people to get more ropes, not less, because we all need them. They become a network so that we're all linked together, getting through this together.
I will leave it at that. Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you very much, Dave. This has been a great time.